What would you do if something half your size walked straight up to you and refused to be afraid? What if that tiny, reckless act of courage was the very thing that saved you? This is a true story, and it begins in silence. Deep in the sun-scorched bushland of southern Africa, where the red earth cracks like old pottery and the acacia trees throw shadows thin as pencil lines, a lion was dying. Not from a wound, not from hunger alone, but from something far more dangerous. He had forgotten how to be alive. His name, given by the rangers who first found him, was Rudo, a word meaning love in the Shona language, chosen with a painful kind of irony. Because Rudo had never known it. Poachers had taken his mother when he was barely 4 months old. He had been kept in a concrete enclosure for 2 years, fed through a slot in a rusted door, never touched with kindness, never spoken to gently. When the wildlife sanctuary finally seized him, he weighed half what he should have. His mane, which should have been beginning its first dark bloom, was patchy and dull. His golden eyes, which should have burned like embers, were flat. He would eat, he would breathe, but he would not respond to anything. The sanctuary workers were patient. They gave him a large open enclosure with real grass, real trees, real sky. They sat near his fence for hours. They played recordings of other lions calling across the plain. Nothing. Rudo lay in the corner of his enclosure and stared at the dirt. Then came the kitten. Nobody planned it. Nobody would have approved it if they had. A worker named Thomas was walking the perimeter at dawn, that soft lavender hour when the bush holds its breath, when he noticed the hole. It was small, barely wider than a handspan, where the base of the enclosure fence had been undermined, probably by a burrowing mongoose. He radioed it in and bent down to examine it. That was when he saw her. She was sitting just inside the gap, on Rudo's side of the fence, as if she had been waiting to be noticed. A small tortoise-shell kitten, maybe 10 weeks, scruffy and bright-eyed, and absolutely unbothered by the fact that she was sharing an enclosure with a 200-pound lion. Thomas froze. Rudo was 20 meters away, facing them. The kitten turned, looked directly at the lion, and walked toward him. Thomas said later that he reached for the fence latch and then simply could not move. He told people he didn't know if it was shock or instinct or something else entirely, but something made him wait. The kitten crossed the distance like she owned every inch of that red earth. She stopped directly in front of Rudo, sat down, and looked up at him with the absolute confidence of a creature who has never once been told to be afraid. Rudo lowered his enormous head. He sniffed her. She headbutted his nose. And for the first time since anyone at the sanctuary could remember, Rudo made a sound. Not a roar, not a growl, a soft, low rumble. The sound lions make when they are content, when they are among family, when the world feels, against all odds, safe. The sanctuary workers were patient. They cried. They cried to be round for nearly 8 hours before they saw a relief vaccine called. The relief vaccine is a word people use when they mean something wonderful has arrived without warning. The sanctuary team made the practical decision quickly. The fence was repaired everywhere except one small monitored section that could be closed if needed. They watched. They waited. They documented. What they witnessed across the following weeks was nothing short of extraordinary. Pula established herself as the unquestioned center of Rudo's world. She would drape herself across his paws like a living scarf. She would swat at his tail when it moved, and then look deeply offended when he barely reacted. She would chirp and chatter at birds, and Rudo would lift his head and watch them too, as if she were teaching him to see things again. And he began to eat properly, fully, with appetite. He began to walk the length of his enclosure instead of lying still. His muscle tone improved. His eyes cleared. The patches in his mane began to fill in, dark and thick and real. But the world is not always kind simply because something beautiful is happening inside it. 6 weeks in, Rudo became seriously ill. A veterinary team diagnosed a systemic infection, likely a consequence of his long malnourishment, his immune system finally exhausted from years of neglect. He was moved to the medical facility on the grounds, away from his enclosure, away from Pula. For 3 days, he refused to eat again. The veterinary lead, a woman named Dr. Petra Voss, who had worked in wildlife medicine for 20 years, made a decision she would later call the most unusual of her career. She brought Pula into the recovery space. The kitten walked directly to the corner where Rudo lay, climbed over his foreleg, and curled against the warmth of his chest. Rudo exhaled a long, deep breath. He ate that evening. He was out of medical care within the week. The poachers who had taken his mother were eventually caught, part of a wider trafficking network dismantled by a joint operation between wildlife authorities and an international conservation unit. Convictions followed. The concrete enclosure where Rudo had spent 2 years was demolished on camera, the footage shared by the sanctuary to hundreds of thousands of people around the world. Justice has a shape sometimes. You recognize it when you see it. Today, Rudo is a different animal. He moves through his sanctuary enclosure with the slow, unhurried authority of a lion who knows exactly where he belongs. His mane is full and dark. His roar, when it finally came, rolled out across the reserve like thunder. And Pula? Pula still sleeps on his paws, because she always knew what nobody else could see, that underneath all that silence, all that damage, all that forgotten wildness, there was a lion waiting to come home. If this story stayed with you, please give it a like and subscribe to follow the animals, the rescues, and the moments that remind us what courage actually looks like. Turn on notifications because the next story might be the one that changes how you see the world.